Achieving motherhood the way nature intends is quite a feat of endurance, anxiety, anticipation, and pain. After approximately 9 months of a woman's body altering itself beyond recognition in order to care for a new growing life, that little life makes its grand, messy entrance. On January 23rd, 2020, at 12:13 a.m., my first child, my daughter Abigail, was born. What you're about to hear is the story of what I experienced through the emotional events leading up to, during, and after her birth. My introduction into motherhood was not an easy one, but I cherish being Abby's mother completely, nonetheless. This is Emma White Montalvo, coming to you from my home that I share with my husband Nick Montalvo and my 15-month-old daughter Abigail Montalvo. This is being recorded as an assignment for my new media journalism class. I was asked to make a podcast to recount a dramatic event that happened in my life within recent memory, as well as to include someone in my podcast that was there for this event in my life in order to provide a different perspective than what I am able to share with you. Could you please introduce yourself, sweetie?
Sure. My name is Nicholas Lopez Montalvo. I am husband to Emma White and father of Abigail Montalvo.
Anything else you'd like to share? Fun fact, maybe?
My record for catching goldfish in the air with my mouth is 47.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get started. Abby was due to arrive on February 10th, 2020. By necessity, though, she had to make an early appearance into the world. About 2.5 weeks before the doctor's estimated time of arrival, I was alone in my small yet cozy studio apartment. My husband Nick had a full day of work and wouldn't be getting home until late in the evening. Our baby, Abby, was being her usual self, dancing in my lower belly, kicking my ribs, and giving me high fives. Over the course of the past 8 months, Abby had become my best friend. I knew I was pregnant with her weeks before any test was able to show positive. One day I was simply myself, but the next day I felt another presence with me. A warm, loving, quiet spirit was suddenly hanging out with me. Do you remember about the day that I told you I was pregnant with Abby?
The day that you told me you were pregnant with Abby, I remember coming home because I was having a late day at work. I think I was coming home probably around 6 or 7. And there was a note on the bed. And just as I came into the bedroom, you had told me you needed to go to the bathroom and you walked out. And so I saw the pregnancy test and, I think you put up streamers and some signs and some little like ribbons on the bed that were just like, we're having a baby. And so I was really excited. And I think I just went through like a rush of emotions of just excitement, fear, happiness, just everything all at once. And it was it was an unforgettable day, definitely.
My body swiftly started changing, bringing with it morning sickness, weight gain, and back pain. Meanwhile, the sweet spirit made itself at home and a little body grew within me. Early on, at about 14 weeks, the baby was large enough for me to feel their movements. While most women feel those initial flutterings a month later than I did, I figured I could feel the little one so early on because of how utterly petite I was. 90 pounds had been my standard weight since I was 12, when I was 22 by that point. But not to worry, I ended up being a whale at 136 pounds by the end of my pregnancy. At 22 weeks, Nick and I went to the radiologist and we got to view the ultrasound together. We cried and held each other as we learned that I was carrying a little girl. Before that point, we had come up with a list of possible baby names for both a boy or a girl. But laying there on the medical bed, the perfect name was softly spoken to my mind. Abigail. Her presence was made known. We cried more happy tears, and we felt Abby wriggling inside me as she reveled in her proper introduction to us. Do you have any memorable experiences from the early part of my pregnancy? Before I relearned Abby wasn't Abby.
I remember early on, I guess this kind of continued throughout the whole pregnancy, but I remember the first time you could notice a change in your stomach, like in the shape of your body. I still remember how like happy and proud you were, and I remember being so happy because I could see you start to change, and I knew it was going to be magical watching you grow.
Do you remember about how many weeks pregnant I was?
I don't.
No, but I was physically.
I think I can find the picture somewhere, and I could tell you like what day it is. Like,
okay. Had I had like morning sickness for a couple of weeks by that point?
I think probably a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Can you recount your point of view of when we learned? Oh. Okay. Can you recall your point of view about us finding out our baby's gender?
I think I do remember this. It was when we were getting an ultrasound, and I remember that they said that they weren't 100% sure because they can never be 100% sure, but I remember just being so happy when they told me that it was gonna be a little girl, because while I would love the idea of having a little boy, I had always wanted a little girl, and I've always wanted to be the dad of a little girl, so just it's kind of a dream come true.
Yeah. I want to talk about the couple of days where we were in the hospital during the birth. I had to go into triage without you there. What do you remember from that evening? I had to call you. I know, and Mom had to rush me to the hospital. Yeah. What do you remember from there?
Well, I remember just being panicked, having the whole drive home over. I was freaking out, like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the moment. Like, and I didn't know how long it would be. I was worried that Abby would be here by the time I had gotten there. I didn't know that it would take, a good, 25. I don't know how long we were there. 18 hours until the pregnancy, time. Until the actual birth. So I didn't know what to expect because I didn't know how fast or how anything was going to go. So no matter how many books and articles and things you read, you can never really be prepared for your own child and your own wife giving birth,
Yeah. The day I ended up going to the hospital to give birth was a memorable one. I knew in my gut that morning that something was going to happen. So, around lunchtime, I started to pack my hospital bag. And that evening, as I was folding a pair of fuzzy socks to tuck into my hospital bag, I realized that I was not feeling well. I was woozy, feeling way too warm, and suddenly I started seeing spots. With some effort, I got up, dug around in our bathroom, and I found the blood pressure monitor cuff that my in-laws had gifted me just a few days before. My blood pressure had shot up to dangerously high levels. That meant that I was experiencing preeclampsia. My husband wasn't home to rush me to the hospital. So, what could I do? I called my own mom, Doreen White, mother of 6, and about to be a grandma for the first time. Took 17 minutes to drive from her home to mine. She knew how serious the situation was. It was a 6-minute drive to the hospital from my own apartment. This happened late, around 8 p.m., I think. My memory is understandably spotty as my condition became worse at this time. I was able to walk to triage, but I rapidly deteriorated as soon as I lay down on their hospital bed. I remember a nurse hooking me up to a drip bag of magnesium to help with my preeclampsia, and this made me insanely nauseous. During this time, my mom was by my side, reassuring me that everything was okay. I was fading in and out of consciousness. I was so tired. Nick eventually made it to the hospital. He worked an hour's drive away. I think I called him previously while I was at our studio, when I was taking my blood pressure, but it's possible I had my mom call him too. Once he arrived at the hospital, he took my mom's place by my side, and she went out to the waiting room. There she called my dad, and she let him and my younger siblings know what was going on. At that point, only one person was allowed in triage. It took about 3 hours, I think, for my blood pressure to stabilize through the magnesium's influence. This whole time, the triage nurse assured me that Abby was doing surprisingly well and was very healthy. During this time, Nick was sneaking me snacks.
Well, I remember just being panicked, having the whole drive over. I was freaking out, like, oh my gosh, this is it, this is the moment. Like, and I didn't know how long it would be. I was worried that Abby would be here by the time I had gotten there. I didn't know that it would take, a good, 25, I don't know how long we were there, 18 hours? Until the pregnancy. Time. Until the actual birth. So I didn't know what to expect because I didn't know how fast or how anything was going to go. So no matter how many books and articles and things you read, you can never really be prepared for your own child and your own wife giving birth, Yeah. Yeah, I guess when I arrived, it was all, first time. I was really confused. I was asking everybody where I should go, and they were all very nice in guiding me along the way, but it was just I was worried.
Yeah, I was told that due to preeclampsia, my labor would have to be induced prematurely. I was given a pill to chemically trick my body into going into pre-labor. This process would take hours. Around 11 p.m., I was wheeled up on the hospital bed, a couple of floors above the triage, to the maternity ward. Both Nick and my mom stayed with me in that maternity ward room throughout the night. I vaguely recall that evening into the next afternoon. I slept fitfully for hours. It was a rather peaceful time, the calm before the storm. Us 3 adults were lured by the sound of Abby's heartbeat, shushing through the monitor speakers. A kind nurse would come in periodically. I remember this nurse advocating for me at one point when I was too out of it to speak up. The on-call doctor and the anesthesiologists were arguing. I remember them arguing about how and when to induce labor quicker, as well as when to administer me an epidural. The nurse, she kept speaking up to ensure that they kept my comfort in mind. The doctor was stressed, and she was stretched thin due to the largest influx of pregnant mothers she had to tend to that the hospital had seen literally in years. There was, if memory recalls, like 54 women had checked into the hospital that night that I was checked into. The anesthesiologists were a pair of a doctor and his trainee. And it was the trainee who eventually was the one tasked to stick the epidural needle and shunt into my spine. My chemical induction into pre-labor was going slower than the medical team had hoped, hence the arguing in the first place. Turns out my cervix wasn't dilating in the way it needed to for labor to commence. So, a balloon was stuck up in me to manually ease my cervix into expanding just a couple more centimeters. After 4 hours of that, I was ready to start the actual labor process. Another chemical pill was given to me, I think. My labor started around 6 p.m. My mother and sister-in-law arrived around then, and they kept me entertained for a few hours with conversation. Around 11 p.m., the contractions of labor were so painful that I asked for them to be excused out of the room. Only my mother and my husband Nick stayed. The epidural did not work as intended. My legs were numbed somewhat, but I could still move my legs and walk if need be, though that was, of course, discouraged. The pain was dulled, but I could still acutely feel every intense muscle contraction. I was able to shift my entire body using my legs to get into comfortable positions. For about an hour and a half longer, I was in active labor. Around 11:45 p.m., I demanded that the doctor come in, even though I had still had to dilate another centimeter or two for the doctor to be comfortable. But I didn't care. My baby was coming, and I was going to push. The doctor did not have a good bedside manner. She was all business. But honestly, I didn't really care. I wanted her to be efficient, and I wanted this baby out of me. She just had to do what she had to do. A couple of times, I was asked to stop pushing, but I always had to resume because the contractions were too much for me to handle. The heart monitor continued to beep away, and Abigail's heartbeat stayed loud and steady. During this whole painful endeavor of birth, Abby was a happy little camper. Around midnight, the room was literally filled with an auditory roar. It sounded like a jet engine or a tsunami crashing. Everyone in the room freaked out, including my medical team, but I laughed. The heart monitor had picked up on my water breaking. I had to try to tell everyone right before that, hey, my water is about to break. But my exclamation of, my water's breaking, was drowned out by the insane and frankly scary sound that had exploded into the room through the monitor speakers. Apparently, the speaker volume on the monitor was turned up way louder than it normally should have been by that point. The medical team was just as surprised and freaked out as my attending family was at the moment. By this point, all the rest of my family was sitting out in the waiting room just down the hallway. My 5 younger siblings were there, as well as my in-laws, my sister-in-law, and my father. Also waiting outside was me and my husband's friend, Andrew. He was standing guard outside my hospital room door. My screams of pain literally echoed throughout the hospital floor. My family and nurses alike thought I was brutally dying. Turns out, I was. To me, my screams felt like they were being ripped out of my lungs. For half an hour, this went on. I was exhausted, impatient, and stubborn. No, I was not going to lay still. I could still use my legs, and so I was going to get into whatever position my body was telling me to get in. Thank you very much. I was going to push out this baby. No, I was not going to wait a little bit longer. No, you cannot tell me what to do. Abigail was born through a natural vaginal birth. Even though my cervix had not dilated completely by the time she made her dramatic appearance. She was placed on my chest briefly, and I got to see my chubby little princess crying out before she was whisked away to be cleaned up. At this point, I was woozy. I couldn't think. I couldn't raise my head. I knew I was passing out. Even after the afterbirth, which was unceremoniously taken out of me manually, instead of the team waiting about 20 minutes for it to pass naturally, I knew I was bleeding out. I remember closing my eyes and focusing on the doctor pressing hard on top of my lower abdomen. Over and over this happened. There was panic in the room. There were so many medical staff suddenly in the room. The doctor said something about not knowing what was wrong with me. She couldn't find the source of my bleeding. My uterus was fine. My vaginal canal was fine. While there was limited perineal tearing, there was not enough to be a concern. Yet I was still losing blood like crazy. During this time, Abby was whisked off to the NICU. Nick was instructed to go down with our baby to know where her room would be. Within minutes of Nick being introduced to Abby's NICU team, he was asked to go back up to my hospital room in the maternity room. But I was gone.
I mean, I was worried, and I was freaking out because I couldn't do anything really to help. I was just kind of standing there watching it happen, and it's just like, okay, this is happening now. And then people were just telling me things that were happening and things that they were doing, and I know that they were probably just saying it more for you, but I was just like, I'm like, I know some of these words and some of the stuff that's going on I understand, but wow, there's just everything is out of my control at this point, and it was just kind of crazy to just like hold on and watch it happen.
For the first time.
Well, I didn't really get to interact with her too much. I was able to see her a lot, but not really ever interact with her that first night. I walked down with her to the NICU, and then there I was able to just kind of watch them transfer her and clean her off, get her wrapped up, and then after, maybe about 15 minutes, maybe about after 15 minutes, they asked me to head back upstairs. That was when my sister and your sister Megan came in, and they told me that they would watch Abby, but they needed to talk to me upstairs about you, but that they weren't able to tell them anything. So I went upstairs trying to find some information, and there were some people just telling me that you were in operation, that something had gone wrong, and that they were trying to fix it, that everything should be fine, but yeah, that was where you were, and that I wasn't going to be able to see you for an indefinite amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of freaked me out. I just started meandering and pacing, um, and worrying. But I was really happy that you were able to make it out and that we were all able to be again together.
Everybody afterwards, they each found a private moment to take me aside and tell me that you were inconsolable, that you were scared for me, and that you were telling them that you didn't know what would happen to you if the operation didn't go okay. That you didn't know what you would do if I was gone.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that I'm here, that we're together, and we're parents with Abby. I love you.
I love you too.
I think it's really sweet how each one of them knew it was important enough to tell me just how much they knew that you loved me. And they each had seen that, They knew without a doubt. I mean, they knew beforehand, of course, but I love you. During all the drama that was occurring after I gave birth, I didn't notice that Nick and Abby were taken out of the room. I was too out of it. I was in critical condition. I have flashes of memories of being rushed down the hallway and down an elevator into the OR. The surgery team was being headed by the same doctor who had delivered my baby. They hooked me up to a bag of blood for a transfusion, and after that I started to regain consciousness. A male surgeon explained to me that I was in surgery due to unexplained and continuous blood loss. They needed my explicit consent to continue. Since I was lucid enough to give consent, I did so. I asked questions, and I thanked them for their efforts, and they prayed over me that they would be successful in their operation. And then they started. I faded in and out of consciousness or sleep for the next 3 hours while on the operating table. I thought it was a much shorter time than the 3 hours I spent in there. It felt like maybe 45 minutes to an hour to me, while my family said it felt like an eternity. But it was just those 3 hours. Apparently, what I was suffering from was an issue no one in the hospital had ever encountered before. The OR team doubled as an investigation team. There was no visible tearing or injury inside me to warrant so much of this continuous blood loss. I remember my doctor constantly pushing and prodding on my lower abdomen, trying to figure out where blood might be coming from inside. Eventually they figured it out because they told me they were done and they were going to sew me up. During one of my lucid moments, I think it was the nurse. It was the male surgeon. They explained to me that they had figured it out. My cervix tissue had been stretched so thin that my blood cells themselves were leaking through my tissue wall. There is no tearing at all. I was just exuding blood from the surface of my cervix tissue. Well, whatever they did to stop it worked. Thank the Lord. Because I almost died. I didn't. But my husband was hysterical out there in the waiting room, while I calmly was laying down on a table throughout this operation. I was peaceful the whole time. I felt warm and I felt safe. I felt with certainty the whole time that I would be okay. I had to be okay. I kept returning to consciousness after all. If I could hold a conversation while on the operating table and remember my last operation the last time I was awake, surely I'd be okay. So, I know I was taken away to the OR, and while that was happening, you were running down to the NICU with our baby, Abby. How was interacting with Abby for the first time?
Well, I didn't really get to interact with her too much. I was able to see her a lot, but not really ever interact with her that first night. I walked down with her to the NICU, and then there I was able to just kind of watch them transfer her and clean her off, get her wrapped up, and then after, it'd be about 15 minutes. Maybe about after 15 minutes, they asked me to head back upstairs.
It took me 3 days of recovery. I wasn't allowed to leave my hospital bed. I couldn't even if I tried, and I did attempt, even with help. I was just too weak. Moving made me dizzy. My vision was significantly impaired due to the magnesium I was still on, and I was on a pure liquid diet. As such, I wasn't allowed to see my baby girl for 3 whole days. Nick was the parent that our precious little one got to snuggle against. Nick was the one who got to feed her first. Nick was the one who sang lullabies to Abby as she slept. Do you have any particular memories from that special time with Abby that you'd like to share?
Yeah. I remember, not really knowing how to ask to pick Abby up. Because I had always been, like, it's a baby. You have to make sure it's okay to pick them up before you, like, pick them up. So I would just, like, ask the nurse, like, hey, can I pick her up? And then they'd be like, yeah, it's fine. Just go ahead and pick her up. And I'd be like, okay. And, like, later I'd come back in and be like, hey, can I pick her up? And then you'd be like, Ani, you're the father. You don't have to ask permission. You can come in and pick her up and hold her and be with her however much you want. And just having someone else say that was a really impactful moment because no one had ever really told me that before. And that was kind of the moment that it really kind of like not really struck me because I had come to the realization before, but it really kind of like it sat with me and it had settled that wow, I am the person that gets to make the decisions and has to take care of this baby. And it just it made it all just real. And I loved getting to spend that time with her. It was amazing.
Thanks for sharing. It took me 3 days of recovery. I wasn't allowed to leave my hospital bed. I couldn't even if I tried, and I did attempt, even with help. I was just too weak. Moving made me dizzy. My vision was significantly impaired due to the magnesium I was still on, and I was on a pure liquid diet. As such, I wasn't allowed to see my baby girl for 3 whole days. Nick was the parent that our precious little one got to snuggle against. Nick was the one who got to feed her first. Nick was the one who sang lullabies to Abby as she slept. Nick and my mom would do video calls with me over the phone when they were with Abby in the NICU. While I was 3 floors above them, it felt much further away. My sweet little spirit friend, Abby, who had been my constant companion and closest friend while she grew in me, she wasn't physically with me anymore. Missing her presence left almost a physical ache in my chest. I always waited until the end of the video chats to cry alone in my hospital room. I didn't want Nick or my mom to see me. I was sad because I wanted to hold my baby. I missed her being with me. After those 3 days in the recovery ward, a total of 5 blood transfusions completed since the birth, and finally being able to eat solid foods, I was strong enough to be wheelchaired down to properly meet Abigail. For 2 hours, I sat in the dark, warm room with Abby. I sent Nick to go out and buy us dinner as a celebration. He knew it was an excuse so that I could have some time alone with my daughter. Abby was so small and so soft. She was a healthy shade of pink. Her face was squishy and impossibly round. Abby had my blue eyes. That night, she slept on my bare chest while I sang her nursery songs under my breath for the first time. I cried a lot. This little bundle of squishy new baby was my little Abby. She was here. She was in my arms. I could feel her love for me, and I could feel my love for her had already exponentially grown. I knew that logically, I was technically her mother from the moment the pregnancy was confirmed. But sitting there, alone with Abby on my chest for the first time instead of in me, everything fully clicked. The world shifted into place. After all the growth, pain, and anticipation, I had thwarted potential death, and in doing so given life to a little one. I had earned and achieved the role of motherhood. I was a mom. I was Abby's mom, and there was no going back. I wouldn't have it any other way, though. Our little family of 3 is doing well. It's been nearly 15 months since Abby was born. She's a precocious, adventurous toddler with a sweet, caring attitude. She's sassy, like her dad. She's independent and stubborn like me. Abby is currently obsessed with her favorite TV show, Bubble Guppies, and she goes crazy with joy when she gets to eat her favorite foods. Right now, that is strawberries or tomatoes. Having been born right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Abby is thriving considerably well. She gets a lot of social interaction due to us living so close to both sets of her grandparents, as well as all of her aunts and uncles. We have a lot of free babysitting. Just last week, Abby went on a walk for the first time outside while holding my hand. Abby was very brave. Before this time, the cars and the sounds of our city were too overwhelming, and she wanted to be held or pushed in the stroller if we were to go outside. But now, she wants to explore the world. And as she explores, she has her mommy and daddy in tow. Watching Abby grow up and become her own person with her own